Could Cenozoic Asian animals survive on Scotland 2017? Part 2. Let's get started, shall we? Bison paleosinensis. Now, for their diet, they are herbivores. For their environment and habitat, I could not find any information where they would live in. Varanus CF commodus. Now, know what you're thinking. Komodo dragon. But this one is from a fossil from Java, from the Paleocene to the Pleistocene, meaning that this one, the specimen consists of several vertebrae, with the size of the specimen is closer to the modern Komodo dragons, and is 20% larger than the Asian water monitors, which are commonly found in Java until modern times. Now for this one, they would have likely lived in woodlands, grasslands, or forested areas. And for their diet, they would prey on small, mid to large animals like bovids, deer, monkeys, and even other ungulates. Pumaparadoides. For their diet, they would prey on small to mid animals. And for their environment, I cannot find any information where they will live in, either in forested areas, woodlands, plains. The giant tapir. For their diet, they would eat leaves, fruits, twigs, and aquatic plants. And for their habitat and environment, they would have lived in forested areas. Hemimacharidas. For their diet, they would prey on small to mid-sized animals. And for their environment, they would live in forested areas, plains, Cynomastodon. For their habitat, they will live in plains, forested areas, grasslands. And for their diet, they would have they have grazing diet. Pongo hoajuri, or it's called Vietnamese orangutan. Now for their environment and habitat, they would have likely favored lowland ditricarp forests and old secondary forests, densest in near freshwater. However, their modern counterparts have a tolerance towards forest clearings and open grasslands, possibly descended from Vietnamese orangutans, as the Pleistocene was cooler and less rainforest and forest was available. And for their diet, they would have eat fruits, but their diet also includes leaves, bark, and occasionally small vertebrates. The European jaguar, but there are studies that it is more related to tigers rather than jaguars, so technically, anyways, they would have lived in forests, and for their diet, they would prey on deer, aurochs, bison, Struthio andersoni, or also known as the East Asian ostrich. Now, not much is known about it, so I could not find any info about this bird. Moving on. And Anchus, for their diet, they would they are browsers consuming twigs, bark, seeds, and fruits. And for their habitat and environment, they would live in plains, grasslands, less forested areas. Vishnuictus, a species of varieted, for their diet, they would mainly prey on elephant calves, pigs, deer, and possibly calves of giant giraffe, Civatherium. And for their habitat, they would have likely lived in forested areas. Tyroleori. Now, for their habitat, they would have lived in forested areas, plains, and for their prey, they would have likely preyed on small to mid-sized animals. Zebu tamara, diet herbivore, and for their habitat, lived in forested areas. Borneo tiger. Now for their environment and habitat, they would have lived in forests or grasslands. And for their diet, they would have preyed on buffalo, pigs, deer, small elephants, pythons, even crocodiles, and more. Civacobus, an extinct genus of antelope. I could not find info about this animal, its habitat, and its diet, so moving on. Ramphrosuchus. For their environment, they would live in swamps. And for their diet, this one was previously regarded as a close relative of the modern false gharial. but this one probably had more a generalized predatory diet rather than piscivory. Stegaloxodon. For their for their diet, they are mixed feeders. And habitat: forested areas, grasslands, and plains. Nisolagus sinensis, a fossil species of striped rabbit. For their diet, they are herbivores, and for their habitat environment, they will live in forests, plains, and grasslands. Leptotylos robustus, or for its unofficial nickname, the Flores giant stork. For their diet, they would have preyed on large rat species, small Komodo dragons, and other fauna existing during its time. And it has been speculated they would have preyed upon Homo floresiensis and habitat. They would have lived in forested areas like rivers and lakes, plains. Dinotherium, for their environment and habitat, they lived in open woodland habitats. And for their diet, they would have feed on leaves of the tree canopy. Fruits, flower, bark, and other plant matter. Homo floresiensis, or Flores man, or hobbit. For their habitat, they would have lived in savanna-like open grassland with wetlands. And for their diet, both they're omnivores, consuming of plants and meat. Trigontherium, for their habitat, they would have lived in large river systems and river months. And for their diet, they would have eaten guiling on bark and roots. Xevotherium, for their environment, they would have lived in forested areas and diet. They would eat grasses, leaves, and possibly even fruits like olives and figs. And that's it for that video. Stay tuned for part 3. See you later, guys.